Right. So welcome, Edwin, to Keen on Yoga YouTube chats. Thanks for taking the time to come on and chat to me. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Edwin's life, not going too much into personal detail, but about his spiritual journey. So the obvious place to start, as we started in one ill-fated interview already, was, and he did talk a little bit about this, how you originally got into, finding yoga in your life, how yoga came into your life, or how India came into your life. He's got a great story. So if you don't mind just going a few minutes over that again.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for hosting this channel and bringing teachers and sort of bringing some spirituality into our world where it's much needed. So yeah, my own, nothing special about my own spiritual journey. I was always deeply, from my earliest memories, deeply inclined driven towards seeking spiritual truths from my earliest memories, or
really
early memories. Yeah.
Can you what? Can you remember anything really young?
I remember being 7 years old in a British boarding school, and we were allowed one film a week. And the old reels, this would have been in the, I guess, early.
Was someone winding it?
Yeah, well, not quite like that. No, but you probably, just about museum pieces. But early 60s, not all the way back. But anyway, not that old, Adam. I know. But and I remember that in the kid that picked the movies, he always just pick cowboy films, because one kid got to choose them. But somehow a film slipped in on the British Raj in India. And I remember being utterly transformed, transfixed by not the plot of the movie in the British Raj. They do polo and the usual thing, right?
Yeah.
No, but the landscape. I was fascinated, and I knew nothing about India.
So that's a karmic connection right there, isn't it? Just something.
That's what Hindus would say,
Yeah, immediate. Yeah,
past memories.
Well, everyone has that, right? I mean, I remember touching down to India the first time in Mumbai, and I got out and I just thought, this feels really odd, but also somehow familiar, but also kind of slightly frightening. Like there's something kind of frightening about that experience, I can't,
because of it's so unfamiliar.
It was unfamiliar, but it also meant that I felt like, because I could sense a sense of progression on past and future, it kind of destabilized the familiar sense of self. I don't know. Yeah,
which is a wonderful thing, right? Because that's what that's one of the things India can do to you.
But that was even from the airport, even just the smell at the airport.
The airport, everything.
Yeah.
Heat,
just so
humidity.
Right. But going on for that, obviously you grew up, as we all do.
I don't know about that. You have to ask my daughter.
Yeah. Well, you got older and grayer and hairier.
I'll sign off on that one.
Yeah. Definitely hairier. And
anyway, so as soon as I could, I was one of these characters that hitchhiked to India, but when you could still do that in the late 70s. So I went overland, and took a few months, actually a couple of years really, and sort of a cross between a hippie and a sadhu, I suppose.
Had you done your study there? Because obviously you're a professor, and everyone knows that. Have you done your study then, or was that before you'd done academic studies?
School.
Oh, right.
And my dad made me promise. He said, "Look, if you want my blessings to go to India, just do 1 year in university." So I did 1 year in Manchester, but just dropped out. I wasn't, I didn't attend any class. I just did it to honor my, my agreement with my dad. Then I hitchhiked to India with no money. Had no money at all. And when you're young, you think you're immortal, and you think and I was driven by this intense drive to go, to seek spiritual truth, and had a sense of surrender, the dependence on. I was probably framing it, what que sera sera, the hippy dippy way of framing that was, but it was a kind of act of surrender to fate and fortune, and seeking my truth.
Had you already got texts that you'd read that had inspired you? What were the kind of stuff that you'd read around that time? Because there's not much coming around to the UK around that time, unless you would read Ernest Wood or someone.
I read Prabhupada's books. No, I didn't read Prabhupada's books.
Okay.
Hare Krishna sold me one. Like he followed me down to the tube. And I had like 20p in my pocket. We used to jump over the stiles. Pay 10p at the other end and tell them you got on the station before. Right? He took my only 20p. I couldn't do that. And he gave me these books, but I just stuck them on a shelf. No, I was reading stuff like, what's his name, Castanova, that kind of
Castaneda, Carlos Castaneda. Yeah, I found them on my dad's bookshelf as well. I
didn't have any structure.
They were great though. Tales of Power.
Yeah.
That's what got me into it, the whole thing. In fact, totally. Yeah, there's a normalcy, and there's something else. Yeah, because the messages weren't coming in kind of loud and clear in the UK, and even when I was growing up, right? Like, in Essex, there weren't really other offerings. Like, there's another way to see reality.
Books like that,
fantastic. Even Castaneda's Tales of Peyote, and
opened up whole.
There's another possibility out there, maybe.
Sure. Other realities.
And you went overland.
So I went overland, in all kinds of adventures on the way, Iran, Afghanistan, you can imagine, and eventually got to India through the Northwest. And, at first I thought I'd check out Buddhism. So I spent, a couple of months in Dharamsala. And then I
didn't grab you?
Not at all.
Really?
Not at all. No, I didn't, they didn't. I mean, for reasons I could go on about, but let's move on. And
right. Yeah.
They, and this is what I think was important. At one point, and I was heading down south to some big Buddhist, mela means, a big sort of get together.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting on a funky old, it says 1978 or 79, just one of the funky old Indian buses. And I remember being so desperately confused and kind of without a guide, without any, I was just stumbling about, no money, and back then Indians were, many Indians had never seen Westerners, so they were just very, people would take you in and feed you. It was quite lovely. It was time. And I remember sitting in the bus, and then I just deeply, deeply, deeply prayed. I understood that my own mind was afflicted, that I'd come to India, but now what, right? Now where was it?
If you can't find it there. How old were you?
I would have been 20, actually.
Right.
I wasn't, a kid.
Yeah.
But, certainly young and idealistic, and, you think you're infallible. And
you got no idea of doing anything particular at home. You'd got no idea of what you were doing in the future. It was
a
India.
Spiritual quest, and I was never going to return to the West. I remember making that vow.
Oh, really?
Right. Yeah. So it was intense. I mean, it was not just a trivial thing. I was a deep level spiritual. I feel I can say that, just hitchhiking like that with no money and wandering about like that. That takes a certain degree, I think, of intensity. But anyway, I made that prayer. And then within a week, I was in Vrindavan. I knew nothing about Vrindavan. It was completely random. I was on a train going from Delhi to Agra, and and I was, chatting to people on the train, and they never met a Westerner, and they were, lovely, charming. And I shared with them about my spiritual quest, and they all said, "Get off the train at Matra." And they were so sincere about it. I thought, all right, fine, I'll get off the train. So I got off the train, and then anyway, and this bus came. Mathura, which is just down the road from Vrindavan.
Yeah.
I don't remember getting on the bus. I have to, I'm not going to say it was mystical, but I can say I have no recollections of I had no idea where it was going. I had no idea. It was just another funky old bus. My next memory, I'm sitting on the back of the bus, and it goes to Vrindavan. I then stay there for 5 years. In other words,
5 years.
Yeah, 5 years in Vrindavan. And that time you're British, you didn't need a visa. Brits didn't need a visa. Yeah.
And I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, because I was reading something about people in America's going to Neem Karoli Baba, right? Like I'm reading that right now, and they had to keep going to get the visa run. But you didn't even need that.
I don't know. The Brits did something, and then in response, the Indians retaliated, and then we had to get visas.
Now we're done for. The Americans get way better visa privileges than we do now. Yeah.
I mean, it was after 1983.
I was getting.
We could check that, but anyway, that time I did do the visa.
So you literally just stayed there for 5. I didn't know.
Well, I stayed, and then I ended up in the Krishna temple there.
Right.
As a brahmachari, so as a full-time monk. And
you never had you just dove into that, as it were. You never had any reservations.
No,
you did.
Well, I had a bit of reservations about the idea that God is blue and plays a flute. That seemed a bit odd.
What was it attract? I suppose what attracted you then to do that when you didn't find it in Buddhism, which most people would have probably, most Westerners feel a more of affinity towards that Buddhism, I'd say, not Krishna consciousness.
Cool. I think it's cool. I don't think most Westerners understand Buddhist philosophy, frankly. I don't think.
No, that's a different matter. But as you say,
it has this aura of Hollywood and the Dalai Lama and the cause. I mean, it's kind of it's cool to be a Buddhist, and even an academe they actually did it.
Once you've read a bit of Nagarjuna, and you start to think again. So, like if you could still think, if you still think at all. So, but I mean, it's true. I mean, especially at that time, that the exoticism of the Krishna and it's very Indian, right? It's very different, right? Like
in your face, Indian, You spend a bit of time in a Krishna ashram.
Yes, I mean, I was very interested in the KC Krishna consciousness movement. That was my first introduction to Indian philosophy, because they fed you. I mean, I had an Indian girlfriend in London when I was at King's doing philosophy, and she was into the KC, and she took me and she said, look, just see what you think of these guys. So fair enough. And I went in, and the food was so good, and I couldn't cook for shit. I was 18. Like I didn't, and I was so taken up, and just the whole thing, and the smells and the incense, and I did, it was a very unusual time because it was so different. As I said, I grew up in Essex. I'd never seen any of this stuff, and they've got the deities.
Was it the 90s or the 80s? Or
the 90s? It was the 90s, about 95, and they've got the deities, and they clothed them, and then they changed their clothes for bedtime. I remember.
Did you ever live in the ashram?
I didn't live there, but I used to, because I had this girlfriend, I was very quite into, but she was a bit split, because she had this kind of Western boyfriend, and she was, into the Krishna consciousness, and so she was a bit split, but I really liked her, so I used to go in every night, and just to hang around her, because she was more into that really than me. I was kind of like kind of a mistake, really.
Was she Indian?
Yes, she was Indian. Yeah, so that's my first sojourn into Indian philosophy, really. And I went back to the King's lectures, and I remember I was telling them about it. They just so dismissive. What's that? So that's not even, there's nothing to do with philosophy. And that was the reason I kind of left philosophy at that point. And the doors shut down after that. I just thought, there was something there for me.
Philosophy was too restricted.
Yeah, it was just so rigid and pompous, and there was all British empiricism and mind tricks, and logic. And I just thought there's something else here that was heartfelt, and they weren't happy. They weren't happy, and I wanted to be happy. And I, in a kind of naive Socratic way, maybe, I went to philosophy to be happier, not to learn logic. I saw these middle-aged guys, and I just thought, what the fuck, you're still unhappy. You might be very smart, but and you might have a good position and work. You
might stick your nose up at everybody else, but you're not happy.
I don't need that. Anyway, back to you. So you must have found.
To answer your question, what attracted me there? The devotees were 100. They'd renounced everything. They just had the loincloths and their saffron robe. They owned nothing. They slept on the floor in the ashram. They got up at 4 a.m. and they had intense practice, and they served all day. That's what I wanted. I wanted that. That's what I was seeking.
They were all Indian,
and they were radiant. No, not at all. Some of them were, but they was very international at that point.
Right. Okay.
Vrindavan, because there were people like me coming through. And Vrindavan, attracted a lot of them. And some of them had read Krishna books in the West and, read about Vrindavan, and they sort of were half hippies, and they came over, similar sorts of ways. Back then you could do all of that before the Russian war in Afghanistan, and before, the Shah, had left, and before Iran closed its borders. So that's what I wanted, and they were radiant, and they were happy because they had no possessions, and they,
and you did that. You just laid down.
That's what I wanted, and I did that for years. Yeah, I left not because I didn't like the lifestyle. I left because the institution sort of became co-opted by these big guru sannyasi figures. It became, institutionalized in ways institutions do, as Max Weber would have pointed out long ago. So that was why I left, but I love the lifestyle, the monastic lifestyle, and that intense, complete surrender and owning nothing and just serving, and just that's so freeing. That's moksha. When we talk about moksha, and if you really Look at the culture traditions. What is the common denominator? Jain, Buddhist, Hindu, all of them. What is the common tradition? It's freedom from desire. And when you're a monk, you're not, of course, you're not free from desire. You still have sex desire. You're still checking out the matagees, still checking out the lady, the ladies in the ashram. That's going to take a long time to uproot. But being free of possessions is a huge step in that direction.
You lived the life, and you didn't, and you were brahmachari for that time, you managed to,
I did for about 7 years, and then it got a bit wobbly. Yeah,
managed to keep it together, right?
That's what I left. But
because I know you have a daughter now, so you did so. But did you think it would be forever, or did you? Right.
Totally. It wasn't me that left. It was actually the guru that I had turned out to be totally and utterly, compromised, shall we say, in his moral behavior.
I suppose that's what I wanted to ask you next. Is what was the teaching like? Did you find a guru?
At that time, there was a kind of a corrupt system of guruship where you just had to take the guru wherever you kind of join. If you joined a temple, you had to take that guru who was in charge of that temple, which of course is not in any way the orthodox or even spiritual way of having a guru. You should be attracted by the qualities of the guru and the character and so forth. But back then it was an institutionalized guru, so you had no choice. So I had this institutionalized guru, and then he fell from his vows. He was supposed to be a sannyasi, but he turned out he was let's just fast forward, but utterly compromised.
Right.
I think it was sincere. I just think it's a bit like Lord of the Flies, when you remember that, those school kids get stranded in an island.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened to the the Krishna movement after the Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta, the guru, passed away.
Yeah, was Prabhupada there at that time?
No, I just missed him. I never met him.
So he died by then?
He died 77, yeah.
Did he? For some reason, I thought he'd lasted longer than that. Right, okay. Yeah. And then at that point, then the guru you had might have been the Western.
He fell down. Then, he broke the contract. So then at that point, I just wasn't comfortable in an institution because there's too much male ego, too much, that was kind of been co-opted by these guru characters. They'd all become, too much attention was being lavished on them. They were being worshipped, in a very unhealthy way for everybody. And so I wanted nothing more to do with that. But I had, I'd taken a vow. It was like being in a bad marriage or something. But then when the guru fell down, then, I felt
you divorced.
I was relieved.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't divorce. He divorced.
Right.
It was just a matter of, maintaining a vow. Actually, I had this I still have, if you give a promise, you give a promise. That's it. It's a very British way of thinking, I think. At least our parents' generation. If you give your word,
yeah.
There's no going back. So,
right.
Yeah.
But by that time, you'd got into the philosophy, right? I mean, the kind of, more.
I became, it took me a while to become attracted to. I was more into the jnana, aspects of bhakti, but. I was never much of a chanter and a dancer, and I
think that you don't do that because I still think of you like often. I think because I know from doing the Krishna stuff, that was you do you don't nothing like a free meal, and once you had the meal, then you're up doing all the singing, and the dancing, and I always felt a bit self-conscious, and I wondered how you felt about that. Do you do now? But you do it now, or?
No, I never do that now.
You don't do the Krishna,
never.
Go into the kind of, because they go very, very ecstatic. It's very.
I never dance. No, I don't do. That's never been my thing. Yeah, okay. But I like to sit and do gentle.
You ruined that image of me now in my head now. Of you dancing around.
What I love to do, Adam, is sit in front of my temple room and chant gentle, melodious, devotional, heartfelt. With no. In self-consciousness, I don't like this public display in the street. I understand, I understand it's part of the tradition, but one doesn't have to accept everything in a tradition without rejecting things. You can just find those aspects of the tradition that work for you, and then you just politely ignore the rest of it. And I think people do that in every.
I think that's a very I think it's a very good point. I think
do that.
I think people do it less and less, though. I mean, like certainly we say with Ashtanga yoga. I mean, it's a very interesting point you bring up because most people think, well, if they find one part of the tradition compromised or doesn't work, then the baby goes out with the bathwater these days. I think that there's that sense, I think it's becoming more so rather than thinking, as you say, like, just because one thing doesn't invalidate the whole lot of it, just because you don't find every single part to be, of your liking, or
Well, right, I think as when institutionalization kicks in, then it becomes more rigid. But when things are just from a place of the heart and a place of, and also in communication with the mind, right? And you find what works, and a more mature way of being in a tradition, I don't think requires that there are things that your intellect can't accept or your heart can't accept. So why torment yourself? Just don't engage those aspects. It doesn't mean you have to reject them. You can just say, that's not for me. Some things you can just reject. But it's true. Traditions, especially when they get institutionalized, do become rigid.
Yeah, I mean, the forecourt, I don't know. I'm kind of with him in terms of power, what structures, so there's just one power block, and there'll always be one against the other, and But so what happened after that? I think
there are states beyond power. I mean, I agree with
you. Do you? I'm a bit cynical.
I think yogic states. I think deep states of bhakti, and you see these bubbas sitting.
But those are only for individuals, though. They're not for structures.
Any structure is power based.
Yeah,
and I think even guruship writ large can be extremely unhealthy. It becomes an institution. The guru is not getting any critical feedback. It's surrounded only by disciples. The disciples are surrendering their critical faculties. I think most in 45 days, let me just quickly finish, Adam. In 45 years of being in this game, the vast majority of the gurus, and I've been all over India years, the whole thing is completely unhealthy. And
because also the thing, the tricky thing as well is that their guru is actually dependent on the student, right? As well, right? So
the ego of the guru it shouldn't be.
No, but not only that, just for their their daily living, right? Yeah, I mean, so it's a kind of code. It's a kind of like noxious codependency, really,
It's unhealthy,
But did you find a guru later?
I just wanted to say, that might be 95% of gurus, but there are genuine, completely detached, renounced souls whose minds and hearts are totally and utterly dedicated. In my case, to Krishna, to the Bhakti tradition, but the same could apply to a Jnana tradition. And they are these amazing beings. And I think if we're sincere, then we can find, we seek that kind of a role model and an association. We can find it does exist. So I don't want to be a cynic, but for your viewers, I do want to say, the vast majority of gurus, they may be sincere, but they're trapped by their egos, and that ego gets fed by, collecting more and more disciples. And, in addition to what you're saying about the material aspect, I'm just talking about the ego aspect, the adulation of all that can be extremely unhealthy. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah. Well, you found a guru, and what were they like? Right.
Well, that was Haridas Shastri that, he just was above, Baba and the Shastri Baba, and he ran a Goshala, looked after cows, because that's the Vrindavan tradition. That's the Krishna tradition. In Vrindavan, the place sacred to Krishna, which is sort of south of Delhi. And
what does that mean? I mean, people won't know what a Goshala is. Really.
Sorry, a Goshala is where cows are protected. It's a sort of general Hindu thing to do in the old days, right? People have cows in their own homes in the courtyards. But a Goshala is a larger place, a shala, like a yoga shala. Shala means large area, enclosed area, or at least enclosed by the old days, the old shalas were maybe a thatched roof and bamboo poles, but now we think of shalas as large buildings or large warehouses or something. So there's a shala for the cows. And it has hundreds of cows. So that was his service to Krishna, because he knew, he was a devotee of Krishna intensely and deeply, and so his life is dedicated to Krishna, and that means he wants to do what's pleasing to Krishna. In his way of thinking, serving the cows is enormously pleasing to Krishna, and that's why his name is Govinda. He's the Lord of cows, isn't it? Many of Krishna's names revolve around the word cow is in them. Gopinatha, Govinda, and so forth. So that was his way of offering. That was his offering to Krishna, and so we became part of that.
Did you go there after the last guru fell from grace, or after? Right. So what happened? I'd like to trace a slightly chronological story of how your journey on the spiritual path. So after this disappointment, what happened then?
I was in New York City. somehow, not because of the ashram. So I came because of the ashram.
So you came back to the West, left India.
To the US. And then when I left the ashram, I happened to be still in America. So then I was looking for a way of continuing my practices and everything, but independently. So first I thought, okay, I'll and I had this little business in the Middle East, Bahrain and places.
Did you? What were you doing?
I would sell paintings, and then I would get photos of landscapes and get them painted, and then I would sell it to the rich, Bahrainians, all of that. The idea being, do that for 3 months and live in India for 9 months. And that, I'm not a businessman, so that it was exciting for a year, and then they got very, very shallow. So, and then I had a vegetarian catering business for another year, same thing. And then I decided I would get a certificate teaching English as a foreign language. I thought, well, I'm not a businessman. Let me get a certificate, and I'll go back to the Middle East, right? You could make good money then. I mean, for someone like me, teaching English, and then I'll live in India. Same plan, live in India 9 months. So then I happened to be in New York City, and then I just went to Columbia University, and somehow, I don't know, I got accepted, and then I had to take loans for the first semester. But after that, I got all these scholarships. And then I just thought, well,
I thought you were just teaching English then. You signed up?
I went there to get, right. I went there to get.
You went there to teach English as a foreign language, and then suddenly you signed up for a PhD.
This is the thing. I didn't even have a BA because I dropped out.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I thought I get a BA and then get my certificate, because then you get better jobs. Right. I didn't even have a university degree.
No. Yeah.
So I thought, I thought, let's get a BA, and I was getting these scholarships to speak Hindi, right? So there were special foreign language.
So you learned it there. You learned Hindi.
Obviously, years and years. Yeah. So it was a foreign language fellowships that funded my courses, and even a little, living expenses. So then I got my BA, and then the doors just kept opening. I thought, well, hang on, this is good. I'm getting paid for it. I'll do my MA. I was doing Sanskrit. I was doing all the stuff that I would be doing anyway. I wasn't doing I was doing Indology.
So strange, isn't it, life? And you stay. How could you stay there on a scholar an education visa or something? Because you're British.
How did I? Yeah. Somehow or other, I just sort of kind of get visas. Yeah. And then it just kept going, I kept getting these scholarships, and I thought, well, I get PhD, then you get really good jobs with the PhD. And so then I got a PhD, and then the phone rang one day, and there's Diane Eck from Harvard saying, oh, would you like to, we've got a lectureship position, not tenure track, not a permanent one, but a lectureship at Harvard. I mean, that was just one of those, like manna from heaven. I know, they're never in my wildest dreams.
Yeah.
I thought, all right, PhD.
You're just teaching English as a foreign language.
Yeah. That is and then the doors of academia just flew open thereafter, And it's been a wonderful blessing, because, all I do with my students is read the text, the Sanskrit text. All my courses are text-based.
I suppose that's the difference, certainly, with you in academia, is that you never really planned it, that you're a practitioner. And that's, what also makes me, very interested in you as a lecturer, as a teacher, because you're not an academic. You're first and foremost a practitioner. Latterly, by chance, almost an academic. Well, obviously you can do the stuff, right? Like you could write, you can think, but essentially, you're a practitioner, right?
Yeah. But I am grateful to academia for making me intellectually rigorous, and I mean, the great theologians of India, Shankara, Ramanuja, all those texts we read, they were intellectually rigorous according to the standards of their day. They engaged their opposing points of view. They were not dogmatically trapped in their little Vedanta way of thinking, with particular lineage. They were engaging Buddhism. They were engaging materialists. They were engaging. So, intellectual rigor is definitely a part of the Indian traditions. So an academe gave me that kind of rigor, because when you're in a lineage, you think that is Hinduism, you think that is the entirety of whatever yoga is, right? But once you step out of that and study it, from outside, you realize the defects in your own tradition, you realize the sort of blind spots in your own tradition, you realize the philosophical wobbly points in your own tradition. And then you gain respect for other traditions when you see, well, hang on a minute, that's pretty coherent right there, even like left-handed tantra. Or whatever, which sort of Vaishnavas would scorn on the ground in India. Vedanta would absolutely scorn that. But when you know, get a chance to study it, you see, well, hang on, there's a coherence here, you know.
There's logic there. Do you think it's becoming? Do you think that's becoming lesser? Because I mean, that kind of like debate with other schools of opposing points of view is always kind of fundamental. If you think about like, I mean, they even stay in Tibetan Buddhism, right? They, you know, that's a big part of it, right? The debate and, you know, that the scoring points and, you know, the temples get together and they, you know, and it seems like people only debate with themselves these days, like, you know, within the group.
Well, they still have that in, you know, in some of the traditional Vedanta things, but now the opposing point of view in Sanskrit is called the Purva Paksha, right? So if you're a Vedantin, the Purva Paksha is Buddhism, it's Mimamsa, it's Sankhya. Now, the Purva Paksha of our day and age, and it's starting to happen, is modern physics, modern psychology. In other words, the traditions coming from the West that are claiming, you know, well, consciousness is an epiphenomena, your neurological epiphenomena. And so that's going to be the modern sort of dialogue partner with any of the Hindu traditions. At this point, they have a common, if you want, Purva Paksha, it doesn't matter if you're a Vaishnava or a Shankarite or a Tantrika, your challenge now is making sense of your tradition in terms of these, you know, physics and what they say about the universe and cosmology and psychology, and what they say about consciousness and brain and all of that. So that conversation we're beginning to see unfold, and in our lifetime, we'll see more and more of that. And the Indian tradition has always been vibrant, always risen up, never been resistant, you know, at least it's always engaged opposing points of view. It's been culturally phobic in a cultural sense, right? The foreigner and, you know, and you know, those out non-Vedika. So in one sense, it's been culturally phobic, but not philosophically phobic. It's always engaged, always engaged other points of view. Have
you found the academic at all conflictive to yourself as a practitioner?
I mean, all the time. It used to traumatize me, but now I
How so?
Well, I mean, academia will undermine any, you know, let's take history, for example, right? Let's say, you know, you like the Mahabharata, you like the Krishna story. Well, the tradition would say Krishna, you know, incarnated 3102 BCE. Well, archaeology is going to say, well, you're lucky if the Indus Valley even goes back that far, right? You know, the material culture of the epics and the Puranas, we don't see that till whatever, 8th century and so forth. So there are, in those sorts of ways, you know, that rather than having 100 heads or whatever, you know.
So the more you learn academically, did it kind of disappoint you? Somewhat?
Well, initially I wanted to, you know, my PhD dissertation was actually on the Indo-Aryan invasion debate, and the motive for that was, well, let's see what does, you know, let's have a look at this Western reconstructed ancient Indian history and see how solid it is. So that was the impetus for this book that ended up forcing me to engage archaeology and Indo-European linguistics and you know, political appropriation, and taking me in areas I had no idea I would end up in. You know, which the minute I finished that book, I dropped it and you know, and never looked at it again. But the motive was that, what we call cognitive dissonance. Yeah. But now I wear two hats. So when I'm talking to, you know, hardcore rationalists, I'll use that language and, you know, use the language of mythology, whatever. But when I'm in my private space or with my fellow bhaktas, I enter into the world of the Puranas and Krishna Lila, and I'm quite happy. There's no way of reconciling those two worlds.
No, I mean, one's rational, one's not rational.
Well, no, one's trans-rational.
Okay.
Be careful about calling it irrational.
Right.
Not irrational. Because it's actually quite rational to suppose there must be something beyond reason, which you yourself hinted at, made you turn your back on philosophy yourself.
Yes, I'm not into reason at all. I mean, and also, I mean, he constantly got the injunction. I mean, I read it again and again, put the mind in the heart, right?
Yeah.
You know, until you're there. Yeah. I read it last night. I think you got to put the mind in the heart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now there's no more dissonance, because I don't try to make the two paradigms fit anymore. Each has its dharma. So the dharma of academia is empirical, it's rational, because, you know, reason is an extension of empiricism, right? You see things, you make inferences.
Yeah.
So there's that dharma. It has a dharma, and I respect it. Actually, I respect it. I think.
Did you have to hide the fact that you were a practitioner from your other academics? You couldn't say that.
The very first, certainly from the Krishna, you know, tradition. But yeah, I was a closet yogi for decades now. I got tenure. I'm a senior. I don't give a crap, right? Grow my beard out. Yeah, you know, like everybody knows.
Everyone knows
But now
clearly
I
what you're
have the
doing.
power. I have a position.
Yeah.
You know, I
Right.
got
Yeah.
fired. They can't fire me unless I do something illegal, right? So that gives you comfort. But yeah, in the beginning, I was very, very closeted and very insecure. I have to say that was my own yogic failing, but I was insecure about being it was okay to be a Buddhist. Somehow I was something okay about.
Yeah. Well, it's
Because
more. I see it's more rational. It's a lot. There's a lot.
Madhyamika is, and mostly
Yeah.
the academics that were interested in
Maybe not
Buddhism.
Vajrayana so much. Yeah.
Yeah, not
Some of that's
Badarayana,
not.
but Madhyamika and Nagarjuna, that was okay because
Yeah.
they were intensely deconstructed.
Very
But
much so.
not all the Tibetan gods and bodhisattvas.
Yeah. That's starting to get a bit far out, isn't it? What's been your biggest obstacle on the path over the years?
Being free of ego.
Right. So do you think that kind of distracted you with the success you've got on academically in that, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
It took me a while, you know, I got caught up with that. I had to
Did you
acknowledge and admit, you think you are the teachings, but you're not. You're just transmitting them. You know, they go into your mind from outside and they come out your mouth, but they're not yours. They're not your experiences. But then if you identify, it's like the guru, you identify with being a guru, then you're trapped by your ego now. Now you're not good to anybody.
You kind of felt like you were a guru at some point, did you?
Well, I knew I would never be a formal official guru because of all the nonsense I'd seen. I knew I was never going to formally initiate people. But yeah, you're a guru. I mean, in the low level sense, in the low bar sort of way of just a guru as a teacher, yeah. You yourself are acting as a guru now because you're teaching and you're transmitting knowledge. In that sense, I think I got trapped into that thinking, and that's still a bit of a ghost that lingers about. But I'm fortunate, at least I'm aware of it and really set a deep intention to be. Because if you're free of ego, that's it. You're done. You're liberated. I mean, actually, liberation is nothing other than we say avidya, fine. But avidya really morphs into asmita. It's a second klesha.
What could you? And the other thing is, what can you teach? What could you actually teach anyone, right? I mean, even in the Gita, says he says something like, when you know the Vedas, you'll be disgusted. No, you'll be disgusting when you know this message with all the teachings you've heard, right?
That's a little bit when he says that he's talking about the Vedic hymns, which are very materialistic, and they're asking for this, that, and the other. The actual old Vedic hymns. There's a lot of subtle digs at the Vedas throughout the Gita. Once you have a radar for them, you'll see that one of the main agendas of the Upanishads is to minimize the value of Vedic ritualism, which is all about, the attainment of material boons from the celestial beings.
There's a context, isn't there? But I mean, there's definitely a lobby to give the autonomy to the practitioner, isn't there, in the Gita?
Yeah, and at the end, Krishna says,
you can do it. You can do it. You don't have to come through the church and through, Brahmanical rituals and pay a Brahmin. You're there in action, doing action as an individual, right? Like the power is with you.
It is, but we still need guidance. I mean, Krishna is still guiding Arjuna. Arjuna approaches Krishna in 2:9 as a guru, he says, "Shishashteham shadimam tvam prapanam." I'm not. Please, I'm confused. I don't, I now want to approach you as a disciple, as a shishya. So there's still that idea of transmitting knowledge, but but what we're talking about is not to then identify your ego with that knowledge. That knowledge is coming down from great beings like Krishna or the sages or Patanjali. And we are fortunate if we encounter it, fortunate if we engage it, and fortunate if we transmit it, but to then start developing an ego around that role is unfortunate, and that blocks the transmission, because now that transmission's mixed in with our ego. So now the hearer is getting the knowledge but tainted, and so we're not serving properly to the extent that we're trapped by our ego. We're actually. Did you
have a realization at some point?
Reducing the ability of the hearer to get the real message. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, was there a point when you realized what was going on and you had a kind of sea change with it?
Yeah, I mean, it just became, and it was just very, became, ashamed really, and sort of,
right.
And humiliated, because, you realize you just got, trapped by your mind, and you didn't, and you were floating along happily without realizing what to what extent your ego was actually taking over your sense of self. So yeah, that was definitely, I wouldn't say a point, but there was an increasing development of awareness of that. I mean, all of that's wisdom, Adam. That's what wisdom is, though. Wisdom is to see the real nature of the self, to see the real nature. That we all work on that. That's what yoga is. If you're free from ego, my friend, you're liberated.
I know you're not going to like this question because it's kind of contradicts karma, really. But would you have done it hypothetically? Would you have done anything differently if you'd gone back again?
I wouldn't have stayed in the institution for so long.
Right.
And it gave me a lot of good things. It taught me tapas. It taught me how to serve God all day from morning to night with every inch of my being. It taught me cleanliness. It taught me austerity. It gave me a connection to Krishna, which I...
Were you doing asanas there as well? Did they teach you asana?
No, they didn't do that. No. It taught me, it gave me my Ishtadevata, which is now the Lord of my heart. So many good things. And I still help the devotees when I can. They've made reforms. They made reforms and now it's a huge international, and it's not a monolithic thing anymore.
Yeah.
Different temples have different moods, and you can meet some amazing beings still, and then you can meet fanatics.
So you're still in the kind of Sangha, roughly speaking.
Not of the Hare Krishna movement, but the larger tradition. The Krishna movement is a branch of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that comes from the 16th century Chaitanya. So I'm totally reconnected to another branch. But in the West, right? So most devotees of Krishna are gonna be Hare Krishnas, right? And and one of the things of bhakti is to associate with devotees. So most of my devotee friends were ex-Hare Krishnas. They're all ex-Hare Krishnas. And we had it
was Chaitanya, wasn't it? Prabhupada had got the Chaitanya route. And I remember that now. Yeah. What was is there a seminal moment of like a best spiritual moment or an epiphany, or was there any particular, people are always looking for kind of a spark moment, right? Or has your life just gone on in this kind of, like service and, in a kind of more pedestrian, pragmatic way, or have there been real epiphanies along the way?
Well, I feel like every time I teach, and to the extent I do that, I don't mean to sound conceited or but
no, you don't.
I feel when I teach, and even though I'm still trapped by ego, but the beginning of every teaching, I intensely pray, and as the invocations to the teachers and Ishra. When I start teaching with that intention, even though the ego is still lurking about, it's not me. I feel Shakta Vesha. I feel the Shakti, and and I listen to what's coming out of my mouth. And I'm right, that's really cool. I never said that before. I never thought of it that way before. And stuff comes out. And I think, and so every time there's an epiphany, a scriptural epiphany by taking that, making that sacrifice, it's not easy to, be a teacher. You got to be up there and, you're representing a tradition and people can ask you any question from any direction. When I do that purely, or maybe even if it's not 100% pure, but really set the intention to do that purely, I feel all of those are eureka moments. They're all epiphanic in the sense that Ishvara manifests right there in the teachings. And that's what the traditions say. They say just as Ishvara is the mantra, is not the mantra represents Ishvara, but Ishvara is sonically present. So Ishvara is present in the sacred texts. And if we engage them that way, Ishvara manifests. And I definitely feel that almost all the time. Well,
no, it comes across because
you're more dramatic than that, don't you?
No. Well, I wanted Krishna to come down. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, seeing Krishna and having a conversation.
Nothing like that. But I've had some.
But no, definitely the way you teach is spontaneous, and you can see that it's not just like something kind of book learning that you kind of got your notes and you're reading from your notes. It's coming out in a kind of heartfelt way, and that's what I love about your teaching. It's very different. It's very different.
A bit more dramatic. I'll have to think. You have your experiences as everybody does, and ecstatic, deeply ecstatic experiences that take over your mind.
You must have had some, otherwise you might have fallen off the bandwagon. You've kept this up a practice for so many years, right? And most people have doubts and they fall off somewhere and they kind of, stop and start and then stop a bit more and then gradually.
I did some of that. I did some of that, Adam. And when I was in university,
did you?
Columbia,
Well, so you had a family, didn't you? You were a householder. So
exactly. I was briefly married. and and had a wonderful daughter who's I'm attached to. And but when I was in Columbia University, I did a little bit of the party scene for a while. I had my little relapses, because I'd become a brahmachari at 20 and was celibate, right, for 7 years. So then I jumped up. I never gave up. Never gave up. A lot
of wild oats to see.
I had a few wild oats to sow.
Yeah.
But I never gave up my bhakti. The practice has got a bit wobbly and all the rest of it for periods. Absolutely. And
what is the practice?
I wasn't following the yamas and niyamas for a period. Right. Absolutely. But I never turned my back. I mean, I questioned it. I pulled it apart, but I never abandoned it. I deconstructed it. I applied all, post-Marx, all that Foucault, everything. I ripped it to shreds. But then I just reassembled it, because there's nothing else out there. It's not like Marx or Foucault or anybody. They're great deconstructionists and they can point to power, but they don't have a solution to what life is.
No, that's the thing. That is the thing. Well, Foucault kind of grapple around with the self-care stuff, right? So he kind of came back to it in a very shallow way in the end. After all the excellent philosophy he'd done, when he actually came back to a solution, it was the most, compared to kind of the yoga philosophy solution, right? It's the most shallow kind of philosophy he did with this idea. Foucault. He came back to self-care. Yeah. He starts to circle back. He starts to circle back to something deeper than the kind of philosophy.
And what was that? I don't know his story.
Self-care. The idea of self-care, yeah.
And what was the self he was caring for? What was his understanding?
Well, exactly. It was very loose. It was all very loose. I mean, I think the self was even accepted prima facie as the self, the material self. Yeah. It was kind of such shaky philosophy after all the great stuff he'd done. Yeah. Anyway, and that's often.
If I could just add to that, I think Foucault and Marx and basically post-Marx, right? Marx the one that really identifies power as at the root of religion. And control over the modes of production. But I think that's useful. I think that's not the whole story. But I think it's very important to have some of those lenses when you look at gurus, when you look at the way women are treated in some of these traditions.
Well, also, I mean, the Vrindavan stuff has gotten really bad, right? There's a lot of scandals around the women being, treated badly there, right?
Yeah, and even here we have some Indo-Aryan temple down the road, biggest temple in the world being built. There was a whole thing about slave labor and indentured labor, and it was a scandalous thing. So I don't think we should throw away post-Marxist. Let's just call it post-Marxist thought. I think that should be a lens that's constantly available in the toolkit. But if you're a yogi, you believe that there's something more than that. There's something more than any political or material philosophy can ever provide. And much as those are useful tools. And then you have to seek for that in the tools that claim they can, in the traditions that claim they can give you that. Then those are the moksha shastras, those are the bhakti shastras, those are the Vedantas and the yogas that at least claim that they can provide you information and about these higher truths and non-material truths that are beyond reason. They're trans-rational. That's the term I think we should use, trans-rational.
So yeah, I mean, I suppose, I mean,
and methods obviously to get to them and methods to experience them. So now that's kind of not empirical exactly, but they're, it's some parallels to empiricism there.
What's the method? Because obviously you've got the jhana, you're deeply involved in studying the text, but your practice is something of the heart. I know, and what is it? And how does it feel like?
And the deeper you go in there, the more Bhagavan can manifest in the heart. The purer the mind is, think of the mind as a container, and when it's full of desires and ego, then there's no space for Bhagavan. But the more one practices and through the practices, the mind becomes more devotionally surrendered, more sattvic in a mundane way, but more than just sattvic, it becomes devotionally surrendered. The more that happens, the more that Bhagavan manifests, and that's experiential, and that's something you just it simply is. And all bhaktas will claim that. All bhaktas, all the bhakti shastras will just point to that.
And that's through chanting.
Well, chanting and pujas and there's we're just reading we're reading a text right now every Friday night, by the way. And we have one more if your listeners want to join us. The last in the 6th series on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the ocean of nectar of bhakti. It's all about the practices. We've got one session left on what does love of God look like? What does that mean? Love of God in Krishna traditions. If any of your listeners want to join us Friday, the New York time, Eastern Standard Time, 6 to 8. Link is on my website. We'll be looking at, we did the 64 practices. So there are practices, and then they develop you develop a state of mind which you don't need. You still do the practices, but it becomes spontaneous. That there's an affection, a deepening of love for, in this tradition, Krishna, but it could be Shiva or some other form of Bhagavan. The deepening of love that's reflected in detachment from everything else, right? A detachment and all of the yogic qualities that we read about in the Jnana traditions manifest, but over and above just the Jnana of the Atman, this love of this other, this love of God, Ishvara in the form, whatever form.
But how does that feel for people thinking about love? I mean, it's
just a feeling of ecstasy, of just, it's a rasa. It's called rasa. I mean, how do you explain rasa?
Taste.
It's a feeling. It's a feeling. It's actual experiential in it.
And you feel that every day when you do your practice?
Not every day.
No.
But sometimes, and sometimes.
Sometimes. And what's the aim? Because I know you've been very
on the surrender, because it's free will. It's not mechanistic. It's not mechanical. So you have to surrender the mind, and at that moment, then those feelings come. The feelings of bhakti, the feelings of rasa, the bhav comes. But the mind can be stubborn.
Right.
So it
doesn't work every day.
It's just routine then.
Right.
Like Patanjali says, still you do it every day. Nirati,
right.
He says, Deshakala Samaya, what is it?
You're going to practice.
Yeah, never, no exceptions. And what's the word? Deshakala Samaya Avichinnaha. Every day. You never interrupt. So some days it's pure, just faith in the practices, and other days is real experience. And that's what it means to be on the path, right? Look, you're going from pure love of God here, right? And you start off with just your mind full of nonsense, right? You're not just going to jump, right? So there's a path, and then that path, then you're slowly moving from here to here. But when you're sort of in the middle or somewhere, you don't know where you are. You have no way of knowing where you are. I was going to say that, right? But you're on the path somewhere, so there's going to be mix. Your old habits are going to be trying to pull. But then you're having these experiences. So you're not having them all the time. The nearer you get, perhaps you're having them more and more. But that's what a process is. That's what sadhana is. And it'd be the same if you did Chitta Vritti Nirodha practice. It's the same in Jnana Yoga. It's the same.
That is the fundamental difference you've pointed out to me, at least, that your aim isn't for Chitta Vritti Nirodha, right?
Yeah.
It's not for merging into into oneness either, right? Your aim is a dualistic aim to be in constant interface with the one you love, right?
Yes, exactly that. That's real bhakti. That's what the Krishna tradition would say, real bhakti. And if you're doing bhakti to get moksha, that's not real bhakti. You're trying to get something from Ishvara. You're just using Ishvara's support for the mind, like in Advaita Vedanta. They worship Ishvara, but they don't really believe Ishvara is ultimately real.
So what's the aim in the end when you die? Maybe it's a bit.
Well, you go to the divine realm of Krishna, like a kingdom of God.
So that would be the aim. That would be the aim. Going to like a different loka, like a different,
not
better.
Not a loka, not a celestial.
A loka, not even a loka. Not right. It's going straight up there.
There's Brahman. And the traditions, all Vedanta in their different ways, except that there's formless Brahman and Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman. So even Shankara accepts that in his own way. But the Vaishnava traditions, Saguna Brahman is the highest expression of the ultimate absolute truth, is God with form. So then you receive a
That's
form.
funny, because usually it's the other way around. Yeah.
Usually meaning, because in the West we've been exposed much more to it.
Usually I've heard. Generally you hear Nirguna being the highest.
East West bookstore. Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily reflective of reality in India on the ground.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
That's because many of the gurus that came in the 60s happened to be Neo-Vedantins, Neo-Advaita. So Shivananda was a great Advaita. So his disciples like Vishnu Devananda, the Shivananda mission, and Satchidananda, they were all Neo-Advaitins. They were espousing a kind of a reworked version of Shankara's Advaita. But the Vaishnava traditions, Prabhupada brought Krishna Bhakti, but other than that, they haven't been represented so much.
No, and also probably compromised, to be quite honest, with the Krishna tradition. and the way it's gone in the West,
Yeah, and all the problems that they inherited.
Yeah,
is true.
Unfortunately.
But also because Westerners don't know what to do with forms of Krishna.
Well, the bhakti,
But
it's all a bit religious, isn't it? People worry about that. It's like, well, we've been burnt by religion and serving God before. We had that with Jesus. We don't want to do that again. So that's why Buddhism is much more, it's an easier fit, isn't it? Like now we're not religious, but we're Buddhist.
I suppose so.
Right? Yeah, come on, that's what it is. It's a reaction against being.
There's many things. There's also we don't know what to do with things like Shiva's form and Krishna's form, four-armed Vishnu, and Kali with the thick.
Fair enough.
We just think it's in mythology, right? So when we're told bhakti is to worship that, we think, well,
true enough. It's not. It doesn't culturally fit. There's no there's no cultural precedent to it at all, is there? Yeah, it's all climactic as well. I think a lot of it's climactic. If you look at the country, the continent, it gives rise to this kind of the inner landscape from the external landscape.
In what way you mean? Because of
if you look at the British landscape, for example, it's going to give rise to a certain internal landscape and a certain internal contextualization of God. You look at I always think of magic realism, and you read some of that, right? Read some magic realism, then you go to South America and you think, okay, it's not magic anymore. This continent, and the flora and fauna and the way that the environment is structured.
Just into that kind of
it makes sense. The idea. The idea. You go to India, it's like, well, actually, this all makes quite perfect sense.
Because in India, every 10 miles is a holy place.
Yeah.
That is associated with Rama or Hanuman or this great sage or that sage. So you can't go anywhere. Then there's temples and shrines. And even in Nouveau Riche, Delhi, the Nouveau Riche temples and Nouveau Riche shrines. So it's everywhere. And so therefore you're encountering little Hanuman under the tree. And then it fits naturally into that landscape. And of course, Hindus like to think that their land is most favorable for spiritual.
Yes, most sacred.
Now,
why do you think they got the most devotional, out of any culture?
I mean, when you go to India, accept that's true. I mean, you could go to Catholic countries and see that same devotion.
There's a devotion in India, isn't there? But there is. It's hard to.
I mean, they would say it's karmic that
Do you think so?
I mean, I think we're definitely born in our bodies because of karma. Of course, we're born in. I mean, no one would deny. Patanjali says, Jati Desha, that you're born, right? What does he call it? Ayor, your punya hetutvat, right? Then you're born into Ayor, Jati. What is the 3 words? He says, Ayor, Jati. Anyway, you're man of life.
I know the second,
is because of your karma. So the country you're born is karma.
Kala. I don't know.
Where's my ears? Jati Desha Kala. Yeah, Jati Desha.
Oh God, did I get it right? Wow, I'd be so proud if I did. Yeah, Jati Desha Kala is a time and place, age.
No, I think we got one of those wrong. Let me just get this. It is Jati Ayoboga. Jati Ayoboga.
Yeah. Okay.
But the point is the jati, yes, that's the family you're born in, the country reflects your karma. So if your country is, very materialistic or, very industrialized or, consumer oriented, that's all karma. And India, given, for me, the sacred texts of India are theologically richer than, you find a lot of that in, Catholicisms and other traditions. I'm not denying that. But for me, the reason I wanted to hitchhike to India, because I felt that was far theologically richer and vaster, deeper. So if you do have that point of view, then you would consider birth in India to be, from that point of view, good karma. If you use it to seek spirituality, obviously most Indians now just want to become Suma culture. They want to, be a big player in world affairs and can, Suma culture.
Well, just to wrap this up now, Edwin, what advice have you got for practicing in this time? I mean, how can you help? I mean, is there anything you can say about how to use practice currently for people who are seeing a lot of stuff that they feel like, that they're powerless to do anything about? And Yeah.
Oh, you
I
mean like
and
Ukraine and Russia or all that?
well, yes. Just currently, is there any advice, or obstacle to practice? Because also this throws up a lot of doubt for people that they, it actually compromises the feeling of commitment to practice. Right? There's a lot of anxiety around, which doesn't really help with consistency in practice. That's what I'm noticing with,
Yeah.
as a teacher.
Well, I mean, it's going to sound cheesy, but I think the more we transform ourselves and become saintly, loving, sattvic people, the more we can influence our little worlds, right? We can't influence Putin. We have no access to Putin that we can go and sit with him and whatever. And even if we did, he'd just laugh at us. But what we can do is transform our own little loca, our own sphere, our own minds, first of all. And then as a result of that, then all of our communications, our interactions with others, if they become more enlightened, more loving, more compassionate, more sensitive, less egotistical, less based on desire and anger, and all the things we read about again and again and again, the Yoga Shastra, if we become that, then we can change our little world. We with our very being, we've only karmically have a certain amount of Shakti, karmically, right? We're not president of a country or United States. Our Shakti, our karma has not. But it's like the beautiful story of Rama, when all the huge monkeys are throwing big boulders into the sea to get over to Alanka, right? And so he's got this whole army of bears and monkeys, and they're building this bridge, throwing these rocks. And there's this tiny little squirrel throwing in little tiny pebbles. And Hanuman says, look, get out of the way. You're going to get squished. And Rama chastised him and said, he's doing more than you are, according to the Shakti that he's karmically been given. He's exerting himself more in his little frame than you are, you great Hanuman. So that's a beautiful message that, if we have some interest in yoga philosophy, commit to being that, practice it, become that. Don't just, let us not just read them in a sort of shallow, superficial way, but let's really, really try to become enlightened beings, Adam. We can do it. An enlightened being is no different from us. It's just someone that made a commitment. And an intense commitment. The only difference was the intensity of the commitment to the path. And we can all do it. It's not like enlightened yogis are some different species of life. They're not. You and I, they came out of whatever, their households, they came out of their avidya, they came out of their trapped by desire, and they made an intention. And we could do it. So that's how I would like to close our discussion.
Yeah.
I think,
All right. That's wonderful. Thanks, Edwin.
All right. Okay, cheers,
Thank
mate.
you.
Yeah, all right. Nice to see you, Radhe Shyam.